I'm Mike Costello, and I'd like to talk to you in the next few minutes about trust. There is probably nothing more important in our relationships with others than that we have a trusting relationship. Every one of us wants to feel trusted, and every one of us needs to have a trusting consciousness and way of thinking in our relationships with others. It doesn't matter whether it's in a marriage relationship with a spouse, whether it's with our children, with our parents, with those with whom we work. We must and we need to have trust, because trust empowers us and trust allows us to feel comfortable, to feel needed, and to feel valued. As spiritual beings, we need to live with trust in our hearts and know and understand and believe that there is a trusting Creator. And regardless of your religious background or the church that you attend or whether you have any faith at all, we all need to believe that what we hold to be divine and what we call God trusts us, and that we have a trust in that infinite intelligence. And it is that sense of trust and the trust that we express one for another that allow us to deal more effectively with the circumstances and situations of our life. We need to trust each other, and we need to trust each other by beginning to believe and going beyond believing, coming to know that others are not going to harm us, that we are willfully not going to be harmed by other people. We also need to have that awareness and thought in our relationship with God and the divine. We need to understand and know that God is not going to harm us, that this life in which we live is not going to bring us any burden or pain or suffering that is going to overcome the trust that we have with ourselves and with the universe, that this is a friendly place, that this is a supportive life, and that we support each other in a nurturing and positive way. The fundamental of family life and of training children is to create within the child a sense of trust. And the same is true of our churches and of our spiritual organizations. They bind us together to create a trust, a sense of trust between ourselves and the divine and the spiritual aspect of life. In order to have a trusting relationship and in order to understand the fundamentals of universal trust among all people and among the universe in which we live, we need to begin the understanding and the thought process of envisioning and visualizing our life and the universe in a trustful way. In order to do this, some of us may have to change our way of thinking. And one of the fundamentals of New Thought and of metaphysical philosophy is changing our way of thinking. And as we change our way of thinking, we're able to change the quality of our life, because the things that happen to us, the relationships that we have in life, the job that you have, the house in which you live, all of those things are parts and aspects of life, and we believe them to be the reality of life. But in truth, the reality of your life and my life is in our mind, in the way that we think about the circumstances, the situations, and the events of our life. One person can have something happen to them, and it can be very painful and hurtful. Another person may be able to pass it off. It has to do with our perception and our way of thinking. We believe that thoughts make things, and that everything in life was a thought before it was made manifest. The camera into which I'm speaking, the television that you're watching, those things were thought of in someone's mind before they came into reality, into being. And once they were thought in someone's mind, other people shared the idea and came to know how to put the camera and how to put the television together. So it's thought that brings all things into being. And if we look from a spiritual standpoint, in the book of Genesis, this entire world was brought into being through the thought of God. And so thought is that creative force that is fundamental to the universe, fundamental to life, and fundamental to our way of thinking. And so if we're going to be trusting, if we're going to live in an environment of trust and support, then we have to have a mentality, a dynamic of our mind that builds trust and allows us not only to give it and feel it, but to receive it from others, and to know that that trusting consciousness is the same as the trusting God that we learned about as children in Sunday school or catechism or wherever you learned your earliest religious teachings. And the fundamental of trust is so basic to our spiritual need and so basic to our human need. We must begin to look at this aspect of trust as we look at all of the aspects of life, understanding that trust like life itself, is a process. And as we move through the process of trust, there is a parameter and a way of thinking that we need to embrace if we're going to have a trusting relationship in all of our relationships, and if we're going to give trust in return and accept it in our lives. The process begins by being in an attitude of gratitude and appreciation. In order to do that, we need to be grateful and appreciate the things that are around us, the people that are around us, the opportunities that are around us, and we need to move out of the way of thinking and out of the consciousness that takes us away from being grateful and appreciating. Gratefulness and appreciation build trust. As you're building the trust that your child has, as you're building the trust that you receive from your spouse or your mate, as you build the trust that you have in the workplace, as you build these relationships and thoughts, the idea that we appreciate each other and that we are grateful for the opportunities and for the interaction, and that gratefulness and that appreciation permeates our thinking and grounds our way of thinking, creates a foundation for the trust that we need to have in our lives. We need to be aware of the fact that life has to be lived in the present moment, and wherever we are is where we are. Whatever experience we have is the experience that we have. And if something happens in your life or in my life to challenge the trust that we have for someone or the trust that we have for some position that we have, we need to understand and know that we are in the present moment and acknowledge the fact that sometimes there is a problem with the trust that we have for other people or that others have for us, and we need to be willing to deal with that. So often people live their lives in the waiting room of life, it has been said. They're always waiting for something to happen. They're waiting for the children to be raised before they really begin to live. They're waiting to get out of college before they really express themselves. They're waiting to find the right person and the right marriage and the right mate before they're really happy and fulfilled. They're waiting for the right job, and we wait and wait and wait, and the things that we want never come to us in life. So often we are the same way in that waiting room of life when it comes to the trust that we have and that we need in life, the trust that we need to support our way of living and our way of thinking. If we truly trust the universe as a place that's going to meet our needs, if we truly trust other people around us for the support and the nurturing that we need to have, we don't need to wait. There is no need to wait for something to happen before we give or receive or create an environment of trust. But what we need to do is give up putting conditions on accepting and giving trust. Give up being in the waiting room. Give up putting requirements upon people, upon ourselves, before we can come into a trusting environment. No matter what happens in our life, we need to know that this is a trusting universe, that life itself is a trusting environment and experience. And because of that, no matter what happens, we need to know and trust the fact that we will be divinely guided, that we will have people around us who will support us and assist us in this life experience. We need to understand, too, that life is filled with challenge, that every relationship is filled with challenge, and even our relationship with God and our understanding of God is faced from time to time with challenge, and that the challenges of our life need not compromise the trusting consciousness and awareness that we have in God and in others, but instead that the challenges and difficulties of life can empower us to value and give gratitude and appreciation for the trust that we have for others who support us, and the trust and appreciation and gratitude that we have for a God who supports us and guides us in infinite ways in meeting all of the challenges of life. We need also to be aware of the fact that sometimes in our thought process, we have an attitude of all or nothing. We want things to be the way we want them to be. We want people to behave the way we want them to behave. And that unless they do the things that we expect, unless life brings to us the things that we want, we are not experiencing the trust that we want. And then we begin to believe that life isn't trusting, that other people aren't trusting, and these conditions create within us an atmosphere that destroys or demoralizes or sedates and covers up the entire impact of trust in our lives. So we need to avoid this all or nothing thinking. We need to be aware in our minds that people are going to do things, people are going to say things, things are going to happen in your life and my life, and it has nothing to do with them. It has nothing to do with God. It has everything to do with what's going on in your heart and in your mind, because we live in our minds and not in the world. And by changing that idea, that thought, and the process of mind, we can change the way that we see life. We need to accept and embrace on a physical and human level the humanness of all of those with whom we come in contact. That means that we have to have within our consciousness and within our awareness the understanding that everyone is a spiritual being in a human experience. And this human experience is bringing each and every one of us to those points and those experiences and those times in their life to know and understand the lessons that they need to learn in life. They are human and we are human. But beyond being human, we are spiritual beings that are empowered with limitless intelligence, limitless guidance and direction, and that if we trust ourselves and trust others and trust the God who brought us into this existence, that in our humanness, we can accept and embrace the fact that we will behave in a human way. We'll be hurt from time to time. We'll say things that we ought not to say. But we need to transcend our understanding and realize that we are human and the humanness of our dynamic is real. But even though the human aspect of our being may come forth loudly through the words that someone else speaks or the words that we speak, that within us there is a spark of divinity. Within us there is the divine nature. Within us there is the ability to overlook the humanness and to celebrate and embrace the fact that in our humanness we have the ability to express and to share. And sometimes the expression and the sharing tends to or seems to compromise the trust that we have. The last aspect that I'd like to talk about today that has to do with our ability to embrace and accept trust has to do with surrender. And so often from early childhood up through life, we are very hesitant to surrender because the idea of surrender to us means that we have given up. But the kind of surrender that I'm talking about is the surrendering of our will, the surrendering of our ideas, the surrendering of our thoughts to the fact that there may be something that we don't understand, the fact that there may be something taking place in life that is beyond our comprehension and understanding. But just because it's beyond our comprehension and understanding doesn't mean that we can't deal with it, embrace it, and accept it in a trusting and supportive way. It means surrendering the control that we want to have over all of those in our lives, and even surrendering the control that we want to have over ourselves and our way of thinking, and opening ourselves to the reality that spirit, that divine light, that God, that the power of the universe can speak to your heart and my heart and bring us to a new and different way of thinking. That may mean that we have to give up some cherished old thoughts and ideas. It may mean that we may have to examine, re-examine, and lay aside some of the thought processes and ideas that we've had for a long time that no longer are useful to us and for us. And that's important, that we accept that responsibility and that we're willing to embrace it and to look within and to trust our heart and our mind and surrender to the direction and the guidance of our heart and our mind as it unites with universal mind or divine mind and the Spirit of God. When that happens, we can know and be supported in an environment of absolute and perfect trust. I don't know what you face today, but I know that you are faced with a challenge, as I am, and all of us in this human experience are faced with the need to have trust, to be trusted, and to be supported in the midst of our trust. And beyond the trusting that we have one for another as human beings, trusting the love and the light and the power of God. God's will for you and for me never changes. God's will is never that anything would happen or anything would cause to be happening in our lives that would be anything but good. And so if we know and understand that God's will for us is good and only good, And if we understand that we're all pilgrims in this earthly experience, we know and can come to a deeper understanding that in our minds we can embrace a consciousness of trust, a consciousness of unity, and a consciousness of surrender. That doesn't mean giving up, but it means giving over to the power of God and truth and light in our lives. And there is no better way that we can give over to this power than to embrace the reality of trust one for another. We believe that prayer and meditation are empowering and strengthening acts. And so we'd like to invite you at this point of the program to pause for a reflection with us at this time. Eternal and loving God, we gather our hearts and minds together in the awareness of your divine presence. And we know that you are in our midst and that you are guiding and directing us to trust you and to trust others. And we choose to surrender our own will and our own thoughts and to embrace the reality and the trust that we have in you and in our brothers and sisters. So we do this in the name of faith, in the name of hope, in the name of love. Amen.
Those were very poignant pointers on trusting. And trust is probably one of the most important aspects of our being toward our own happiness.
Without doubt. And I think so often we think in terms of the fact that we need to trust others. But really, when we look at our life experiences, the times that we're hurt the most is when we believe that others don't trust us.
Yes.
And so we don't really embrace or come to fully understand the value of expressing trust to others. And that when we compromise that ability or that expression that we have to trust others, we may be doing far more damage than we could do in any other circumstance or situation.
Yes, and we don't realize how far-reaching that can be.
Just a word,
Yes.
just a word sometimes does it.
Yes.
And then you take it even a step further from the trust that we have for people and the need that we have for trusting relationships. But when we can't trust God, or if people have or come from a faith tradition where they're not able to really feel that God trusts them completely, I think that that is a very compromising spiritual dilemma.
Yes, it holds people down, keeps them from growing, and causes them to be unhappy and sad. And this, as you were speaking, I was thinking of my little daughter who came in this lifetime to help me to be more trusting of God. And that was a very harsh lesson for me. But this young man, Matthew Ward, who's been giving information to his mother for a book, Within and Beyond, well, he said that Karen came from the angel kingdom to help me to trust God, because in other lives I had blamed God overmuch for the deaths of those whom I loved, and to a fault. And it held back my spiritual growth very much. And when you look at it like that, it's we see how far-reaching it can be from lifetime to lifetime. And we have to have measures given us by the Spirit of grace and mercy to help us get through that. And it's a wonderful thing that if we look for help, it's always there.
And that sense of trust that you shared is such a beautiful story in your own life, because here you had a daughter and who in early life, how old she was, 7?
3.
3. And to be taken at such an early age, and yet the need to trust God, as you said so beautifully, was so fundamental to that. And that has to do with the surrender that I was talking about.
Yes.
It was to surrender, and in surrendering you weren't giving up, but what you were doing was giving over to the trust that you had in a loving God, and knowing that that loving God in turn had given of spirit to you the empowerment to deal with that.
Yes, and that happened almost 40 years ago. And I remember kneeling at my bed the morning Karen died suddenly and praying the Lord's Prayer. And I was putting total trust in God, that God is good, is indeed good. And I could see a world of information in every word and in every sentence. And then it wasn't until fairly recently that I had that information that is indeed why Karen came into this life. And my first thought was, why would she have to sacrifice her life? Well, we all sacrifice one way or another to help others. and we don't even know to what extent we are sacrificing or others are sacrificing for us.
It's very important. We don't know that death is a sacrifice.
Yes.
We don't, and we certainly believe that life existed before this life and life will
Yes.
exist after this life. And so death is simply an experience. To us, it's a very personal one, and it's something that touches us very deeply. But part of that touch that we have of death is, in a way, a lack of trust.
That's right.
Because it's a lack of trust that there is life eternal. There's a lack of trust that we'll ever be together. And those things may or may not be true from the standpoint of our belief system, but the importance of trusting them as a reality are just infinitely important to our growth.
Exactly. And one thing about so many near-death experiences and the channeling of information from those on the inner gives us that information that you just said so well, that we know there's life, that life is eternal. We know that life is a continuation process. We only drop our physical body. Everything else stays the same. The mind is there. The past, present, and future is still there, just in the same modality that it was as we lived in our physical body.
And it's important that we understand that and that we trust in that our trust extends to the fact that we know that there is eternal life and that we trust beyond what we can see.
Yes. Well, that was a very hard lesson for me to lose a daughter at age 3, but on the other hand, I'm so grateful that I passed that test, and that it isn't that I didn't grieve. I lost my voice for a week and couldn't speak, but barely. But it's that I didn't lose faith in God, and I looked to God at the moment and in the future and for continuously as my help and support in time of trouble.
And of course, the other aspect that perhaps we don't articulate as well and as often is that we need to trust God for the fact that we're going to die.
Exactly.
Because there is no way to escape that.
Yeah.
And it's a very interesting aspect of our human life and a very interesting aspect of our spiritual dimension, how we have mystified death and we've made death so much more than it is,
Yeah.
and we've allowed it to compromise us in so many ways. But death is inevitable, and it is part of the divine plan, at least death as we know it from the...
Yes, and it's a wonderful aspect of being, and it's so much more wonderful than that there's nothing, than nothingness. And I remember I was a hospice volunteer for 10 years over at Community Hospital, and there was a minister over there who called death that last great enemy, death. And it really wasn't very promising to have it be called that last great enemy, because actually it's a friend. It's our death is. It just is. It's neither an enemy nor a friend. It just is. But it's a positive aspect of being, because it does mean that life is ongoing.
And it forces us to go, because of course no one would choose to go. I mean, the old story that's where the minister asked how many people wanted to go to heaven, and everyone raised their hand, and he said, how many want to go today? And nobody left their hand up. So it is a reality that is hard for us to grasp. And so often in our church and in our fellowship, we spend a lot of time talking about death. I never let a month go by that I don't talk about death, because I think that we need to be desensitized, if you will, and move into an attitude of trust and understanding about what this experience is. And it's just fundamental to building our trust.
Yes, I think you might say a lecture or a Sunday go by, and that's true. And I know I do in my services too, because it's part of it's the balance, life and death, light and darkness, good and evil, and it's all balance. And balance is what keeps us the need to be here, and shows that we have growth. Is when we are able to achieve balance.
To achieve balance, and this aspect of trust is so important to maintain that balance. And I think in terms of people in their work, of course, we know about what a lack of trust can do in a personal relationship when a couple are together, but in a work environment, when someone believes that they're not trusted, and when the trust that they have isn't expressed, then their self-esteem is damaged. And so the whole process begins a downward spiral whenever we have a lack of trust.
Yes, I remember, as you were speaking, I remembered a time when my mother didn't trust me. A neighbor told her that I had gossiped about her daughter, which I had not done. I'd never heard the gossip that I was supposed to have said. But it hurt me so deeply that I never forgot that my mother didn't trust me. And in the presence of that neighbor, she doubted my word. And it was a very traumatic experience for me.
The trust, and of course, when someone we love doesn't trust us
Yeah.
or falsely accuses
Yes.
us, then it is so much more damaging. And in
Right.
that case, the case that you just shared with us, it pierced you much more deeply than if someone on the street would have said something.
Well, certainly, certainly, because I felt that my mother should know. She used to say of all her children, I was the most stubborn, but at least she could trust me to tell the truth. And so then and I think that what was such a great affront to me was that she did it in the presence of the lady who was accusing me unjustly. And it was totally unjust because I didn't know anything about what she was talking about. But I think we learn our lessons in that way, and then we don't put that off on other people. But we're able to show our trust in others and to be trustworthy and to trust others. And so it helps toward our character growth. Every stab like that helps toward our character growth.
And also, our character growth and our soul growth is benefited when we are able to overcome compromises in trust.
Yes.
If others fail us in some way, then we ought to be very cautious about not poisoning ourselves to
Yes.
them or to their way of thinking,
Yes.
and to not allow that to injure our thought process and the process of mind.
Yes, and it makes us be trustworthy. I know that spiritually speaking, I feel we're responsible for whatever we say in a spiritual way in church services or with any group. And so some people say, well, we just have to tell them what we think. Well, I think we have a grave responsibility in telling people truth or saying this is the truth as I see it, not that this is absolute truth.
And allowing people to understand and experience their own truth, but to do
Yes.
it in a non-judgmental way, but still maintaining the trust that we have for each other.
Yes, because we're trustworthy if we trust others and vice versa. It goes hand in glove like that, don't you think so?
Absolutely. We need to trust each other, and we need to trust the presence and the power of God. And when we trust that presence in others, then our lives become more fulfilling. Reverend Freelander and I have been talking to you about concepts of confident living and trust, and we hope that you found this information to be useful, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Helps me be strong, confident living, comforts my heart from such a blessing I can't depart. Confident living helps me expand visions of value, the kingdom at hand. Confident living, talent to win, gift of the Spirit moves from within.